Hi, folks. We're Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue of the class of politicians that existed until the late 1980s in the West. Had nearly all of them served their country in the armed services and wartime in whatever capacity. Or they'd had a relative, they'd been just maybe a tad too young, that their father or older brother had. So they'd been very close to the idea of nationhood, being proud of their nation, their history, their heritage, of being prepared to take up arms to defend it and to protect their fellow citizens. And that's a bond once made that's hard to break. To protect and to serve. Now, the people who were moved into politics, and using, well, it could be American politics or British politics, whatever, but particularly the ones, the nations that weren't overrun, then these people, when they went into politics, they might have been young men during the war, and this would be the same, say, in the First World War, in Britain as a case in point, and in the Second World War. The political class had all served in one form or another, either on the front lines or in some capacity. They could have been worked in the ambulance services, taking the injured bodies out of the front lines while they're being shot at, and all this sort of thing. And many of their comrades would have been injured or died. But the idea was to serve your country and to protect your fellow citizens. And again, that's a tough, difficult bond to break. If someone comes along and says, hey, why don't you sell out your fellow citizens and I'll make sure you have a waterfront home? I don't think it would get very far. Maybe you'd get the odd one or two, but that'd be it. But by the late 1980s, that class of people were pretty much all gone. Either they died off or they were infirm. They'd been, been born in 1920 or around that time. And so they were retiring, or few and far between, by the time 1990 came around. And so there's a new political class coming, ones that had maybe never served their country or had never protected their fellow citizens. Now, I'm separating here the Korean War and, say, the Vietnam War. Firstly, there were far fewer numbers that were serving in those wars. Those wars weren't to protect Americans; they were ideological, political wars, and so people typically were, unless they were professional soldiers, were on 12-month turnaround. So at the end of 12 months, if they were still upright and warm, they would go back to wherever they'd come from. So I not that people, the professional soldiers serving in there weren't dedicated to their country, and so on. They were, but it was a different war in the sense that there was no attempt to invade or kill their fellow citizens. The Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, weren't directly threatening the United States, for example, with invasion or direct military conflict or something like that. So really, it's the World War I, World War II people. Now, when they were gone or nearly gone, then and that same time, and one wonders if it's somehow a coincidence, but at that same time, the Berlin Wall fell down, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the globalists came into the Western bodies politic, which they were already in the process of penetrating and getting into, particularly things like the education establishments and some of the think tanks and so on. So and the globalists came along, and they were able to very easily actually get the Western politicians to just sell out their fellow citizens and throw in their lot with the globalists. How would you actually do that? We want you to ignore your fellow citizens. Fuck the vote, fuck the civis, fuck the rule of law, fuck your little process, fuck Martha Stewart. Just do what we want you to do, um, and again, we'll make sure you get a nice waterfront home. We'll make sure that your 18-year-old daughter gets a job as executive vice president of fashion in some well-known clothing label or something like that. So it stuns me to this day how easy it was for the globalists to do it. Between the early 1990s and today, they managed to take over everything in the West and barely a voice in protest. It was an incredible achievement, no matter how you look at it. And the issue was that once those people who had served their country and protected the public and believed in public service, they believed in their country, believed in their people, believed in their history. Once those people were gone, there was no one left to defend it, and no one left to protect it. And the citizens were under almost, in ideological terms, were under just as much danger as they had been from foreign invasion. But this time, the foreign invaders, Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, all these sort of guys, they were using our own politicians against us. And who would have thought that was even possible? But it was, and look where we are today. If you need to, if you need any proof of what's happened, we've been sold out big time. And but that could never have happened, I don't believe. Maybe in a far smaller scale. I don't believe that could have happened with the politicians that had served in their country and protected their fellow citizens. Now there were still sort of Marxist activists and those sort of things. The workers of the world should be an international and all, the big international and that sort of thing. But beyond that, they were still nationalists and were still prepared to do what was necessary to protect the country and their fellow citizens. But once that was gone, then the West sort of went into the globalists just took over the entire political establishment in all Western countries. Goodness me, how successful they were. And there are things that just wouldn't have happened years ago. Even Christians were being persecuted in the Balkans in the 1880s, and the leading sort of Christian nation, if you will, of the time in that area wasn't going to have it, and so the British Mediterranean fleet started cruising off I think it was the Adriatic coast, and the locals continued to harass and murder Christians, and so the British made a display of blowing up a few hills and landing Marines with utter impunity. And one look at this mighty fleet cruising up and down with the high, the serious high tech shit of the day, and those local goons, Islamic goons, had no answer to that, and they knew if they continued to do what they were doing, that they would be held to account by people who were concerned about the rule of law, who were concerned about real justice and those sort of things. So they worked out, hey, it's going to be smart if we stop doing this. And not that the Balkans hasn't been an area of dissent and drama, going back to the time of the Romans and even before that. It has been. It continues to be today. But those were the sort of things that would have happened years ago. When we see the goings on around the world today, there's a collective failure of the Western will to stand up for what's right. There's way more effort put into transgender bathrooms than there is to anything worthwhile these days and sensible. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.